Hey, what is up guys? It's Stan here, back with another video, and in this one I want to talk about the monitor that I have behind me. This is the LG Ultragear 38GL950G, and I want to talk about why this is the best ultrawide money can buy and why you should be interested. So for a while now, about 3 or 4 years now, I've been using a Acer 32-inch 4K G-Sync monitor, but it's been locked at 60 Hz. So I've been wanting to go to that high refresh rate for a while. To date, there hasn't been any 4K 32-inch high refresh rate monitors on the market, and I've been waiting for almost 5 or 6 years now, ever since 4K first hit the market. So this monitor is very interesting to me because this is the first ultra-wide in a 38-inch, and as you can see behind me, it is big. It's got a resolution of 3840 by 1600, which is actually not too far off from 4K. 4K being 3840 by 2160. So you're basically losing about 500 or so pixels from the top and bottom, but then what you're losing on the top and bottom, you're basically gaining on the width. And as you can see here, gaming looks better in an ultra wide. It is just that simple. Gaming is so much more immersive when you're dealing with an ultra wide. So on the market right now, there is basically only one manufacturer that's making 38-inch monitors. Of course, that's LG. Now during CES this year, Acer also announced a X38 Predator using the exact same panel, basically the same curve, same whatever, just only with Acer's own industrial design. So that should be coming out sometime later this year. So more about this monitor. So the monitor has the latest generation of G-Sync, which allows the monitor to be run at 144 Hz natively or overclocked all the way to 175 Hz. But there are some drawbacks to that, and I'll talk about those in a little bit. Now, seeing as it is the latest version of G-Sync, it also supports FreeSync or Adaptive Sync over HDMI or DisplayPort. And this is one of the primary reasons why this monitor was so interesting to me, because I wanted to be able to use both AMD GPUs as well as NVIDIA GPUs with a single monitor. And to my knowledge, this is the only monitor on the market right now that has this firmware that supports both Adaptive Sync and G-Sync. Now the monitor, as it arrives in a very large box. I actually was not expecting a box this large. As I said before, in my 32-inch monitor came in a box that was substantially smaller, but because this is ultra wide, it is actually a handful to be able to lift this thing up. Now the unboxing experience was pretty straightforward. There is a accessories box along with a lot of hard foam, white foam surrounding the monitor, and as you take out the accessories box and take out the foam, you'll find the stand along with the actual monitor all packed away very nicely. Now with everything unpacked, the assembly is actually very simple. The assembly of the monitor actually can be done completely toolless if you wish. The stand just snaps into place on the monitor on the back, and there is a lift to release latch that basically allows the stand to clip in very easily. Now the base of the stand is just a thumb screw. You can either use a screwdriver or you can use the little tab to be able to screw it in without any tools. And as you can see here, installation and the setup of this monitor was very quick. Now as for the accessories, you get a USB cable, you get an HDMI cable, and you get a DisplayPort cable that supports all the way up to 5K resolutions. You also get some literature and some manuals and a power brick that's actually pretty big. This monitor I think is rated for 75 watts or give or take or something like that. And this power brick looks like it's something that can power one of those Alienware laptops rated for 150 or 200 watts. It would have been nice to see the power brick integrated directly into the monitor, but then there are pros to having a separate power brick where if the power brick were to ever fail, you can get another one very easily without disassembling the monitor. And since the monitor isn't portable, it doesn't really matter. You just need to hide that power brick behind the table or under the table, and you'll probably never see ever again. So, you know, it is what it is. Now, as for the design of this monitor, you can see here, you have a V-shaped stand on the bottom that's kind of plasticky and has glossy plastic on the backside, and the glossy plastic is red. Now, it would have been nice to see this stand a little bit more premium, perhaps made of metal, like how the actual tube of the stand is. The tube is a very beefy, very heavy metal stand to be able to hold the weight of the monitor. Now, one of my biggest gripes of this ultra-wide monitor is the stand itself, or the build-in stability of the monitor, because as you can see here, there is a little bit of a wobble, and then there's a little bit of stability issues if you were to ever bump or to shake the table. The range of motion on this monitor is okay because it has the ability to lower as well as raise, and it does have the ability to tilt, but it does not have the ability to pan and swivel because it's such a big monitor and it's an ultra wide. Now, because it can't pan or swivel, I would have liked to see the mount here a little bit more robust because, as you can see here, there is quite a bit of wobble and quite a bit of movement. Now, there is a solution to this, and I've got a separate mounting arm that I've purchased for this monitor. I don't have it yet. That's going to have to be a separate video. I'll probably get it out next week. On the back of the monitor, as you can see here, is a very flat matte black. It's very basic. It doesn't have to be fancy. You're not really going to be looking at this anyway. But what is fancy is what LG calls Sphere Lighting 2.0, which you can see here. Now, I've got it set to a dynamic rainbow color so that the camera can pick it up a little bit better, but you can set it to various colors, and you can even set it to a dynamic mirroring of what you've got on the screen so that it kind of splashes the color on the wall, complementing whatever you have playing on the screen. So the effect is actually kind of nice. Of course, you can always disable that if you don't want. In terms of connectivity, you've got connections for DisplayPort, HDMI, and a USB Type-B connector. You also have 2 outputs for USB 3.0 Type-A's, a headphone jack, and a power in. One of the caveats to be able to have that sphere lighting mirror what you've got on the screen is that you have to connect the USB cable in so that it can get some kind of data feed through to be able to make that kind of projection. We'll take a look at that in a little bit. Now, at the top here, you have some vents to help the monitor dissipate the heat. Now, in my experience, the monitor doesn't really get that hot, and of course this is helped by the active fan on the inside of the G-Sync module to help pull the heat away from the monitor. I have read a couple of complaints about fans on G-Sync modules in other monitor models, but I'm glad to say that in this one, the fan isn't an issue. Now, if you do put your ear up against the monitor, you can hear a very, very slight hum of the fan, but about a foot away or 2 feet away, you basically can't hear it. And compared to all of the other devices, your laptops, your computer fans, or whatever in the room, there's absolutely no chance that you're going to be hearing it. So it looks like they've changed the model of the fan on the G-Sync unit so that it's not loud and squeaky anymore. Basically what I'm saying is this fan isn't a problem. Now let me get this installed on the table and all set up, and we'll take it from there. All right, I've got the monitor on my desk, and as you can see here, this monitor is actually sitting very close to my speakers. Before I had the 32-inch 4K monitor here, and I had quite a bit more gap between the monitor and the speakers. This monitor has filled up that space pretty well. The first thing I noticed is that the height, the top and the bottom, of course, I'm losing a little bit of space on the top and bottom, maybe an inch at the top and an inch at the bottom, but you're really making it up on the horizontal section here. That's the nature of an ultra-wide. It is what it is. Now, I mentioned this monitor is the first ultra-wide monitor that I've actually seriously considered owning, mainly because of the size. And it's not so much the size diagonal that I really wanted, but it was the vertical area that I needed. Now, 34 inches or smaller ultra-wides, you really don't get that much vertical space on it. So if you were to go to a web page, for example, and you take a look here, you just can't have enough information, or you feel like you're being really restricted on the vertical section. But the 38-inch, for example, here, I could see quite a bit of stuff here on the screen, and that was one of the biggest selling points of this 38-inch versus all the other ultrawides out there is the vertical area that I get. And I'm not gaming the whole time. You have productivity and Excel spreadsheets. It's very useful to have that vertical space. Now, as for physically the monitor, to be able to control the monitor, there is a little control joystick on the bottom where you can push in and bring it to the right here. And if I can zoom in for you here so that you can see what I'm talking about, the on-screen display here shows you the configuration of the monitor. As you see, I'm running 160 Hz with G-Sync on, overclocking on, HDR off, and a fast response time. Except for the frequency, all the other settings are basically default right out of the box because that seems to be the best settings for this monitor. To the right of that, you also have a little wheel that you can turn on or turn off or change the brightness of the LED Sphere 2.0 LED on the back of the monitor. Now, you also have software that you can load up on the monitor to be able to control that. So we'll take a look at that now. What I have here is the LG Ultra Gear Control Center. And you can see here, I have the option to run it in static mode, peaceful mode, dynamic, sound sync, or video sync. Static mode basically just allows you to keep a single color, red, blue, whatever. You can change these colors accordingly. Peaceful mode is to be able to smoothly change to the colors. Dynamic mode is where you get that RGB unicorn colors that rotate through. Sound sync mode is kind of interesting. This is basically it will pulse colors or pulse what you're seeing based off of the volume. So the example that they like to give you is if you're playing an FPS, for example, and you're shooting, and that's the loud bangs. That's gonna pulse the colors on the back to give you a little bit more immersion, like you're doing a little bit something exciting, right? As for video sync mode, that's actually what I'm running right now. Video sync mode basically takes some of the colors on your screen and then splashes it on the back, so that, let's say you have something orange on the screen, then the wall turns a little bit orange as well. So it's kind of a cool effect. It's nice, but there's a little bit of latency between what shows up on the monitor versus what's on the screen. And when you're tabbing between the applications, it'll turn off and turn on a little bit. So turn off and turn on for a split second. So it's not completely smooth. It would have been a little bit better if it was a little bit faster reacting, but it's cool. It's nice when it's you're watching a movie or whatever, but if you're playing the game, there is a little bit of delay. The other piece of software that you can have is the LG Control, on-screen control. And what this allows you to do is you can divide up the screen in split screen mode or picture-in-picture modes. What this does is it kind of artificially creates these snaps where if I just drag it, you can see here, this is an application that will snap to whatever configuration that you want it to go. So let's say I want four sections on the top and 4 sections on the bottom. As I move the application through to the different sections, it will light up green and it will conform to that size. And there's different configurations here you can see. It's kind of interesting, kind of cool. Not particularly useful if you, unless you're planning on really doing a lot of things on the screen at the same time, which I guess if you're buying an ultrawide for productivity, it could be used in that manner. Now back to why I am running the screen at 160 Hz. So to be able to change the frequency of the monitor, you have to first enable overclocking mode. And then if you go into NVIDIA control panel, you can bring up under the change resolution here, you can change the resolution and change the refresh rate. In the drop-down menu here, you have the option to run it at 175, 160, 140, 120, 85, and 60. So we're really only interested in the high refresh rate. Now, out of the box, this monitor will actually only run at a 60 hertz, and it won't be running at the high refresh rate unless you actually make this change. It's one of those things where a lot of people actually buy these monitors and never make the change, and they're stuck at 60 hertz without even realizing. There's actually something to be aware of when you're talking about frequencies for this monitor, because not all frequencies are the same. And what I mean by that is you can run up to 120 hertz on this monitor with full 10-bit and full RGB color profile, and be fine. But if you were to push it any higher, you're gonna have to cut back on some of the settings because there's just not enough bandwidth over the DisplayPort cable. If you were to go to 144 hertz, for example, you need to cut back from 10 bits down to 8-bit. Visually, there's very little difference between 10-bit and 8-bit that you're going to be able to see, honestly, unless you're running something that requires the 10-bit. That's the recommended way, and you're good from both 144 hertz and 160 hertz. You're good for just dropping the 10 bits to the 8 bits. However, if you want to run at the 175 hertz, you actually have to drop the color profile from full RGB down to a limited 422. Without getting into all the details, basically the text becomes a little harder to read, and unless you're gaming 100%, if you're doing any productivity or anything that has to do with reading or text, it's kind of not recommended because there's such a visible degradation in text. I'm gonna link a website, TFT Central. They did a very good review of this monitor and talked about all the nitty gritty stuff about the different settings. I really highly recommend you check out that website if you're looking to buying this monitor to truly understand what's going on. But basically, 175 hertz, there's so much trade-off for me personally that I just can't run at that. So I have to run at 160 hertz. Now, granted, 160 hertz is 175 hertz and 160 hertz. That's only 15 FPS. That's a really small difference, especially if you're running so high already. So to me, 160 hertz is plenty on this monitor, and especially with a GTX 1080 Ti with this resolution, I'm hard pressed to even push 160 hertz FPS on most AAA modern games. Now, that's something just to be aware of. I don't think that's a make or break thing. It's just something that it's nice to know before you actually purchase this monitor. Now, the other thing to be aware of is the HDR capability of this monitor. You might have already heard that this monitor is only capable up to HDR 400, which is the lowest tier or definition of HDR, or the lowest quality of HDR. This monitor, personally, when I bought this, HDR was not a very high priority on my list of requirements here. High refresh rate, ultra wide, that was why I purchased this monitor. To be able to properly display a very good HDR rendering, you need to have very bright backlight, so 600, 800, 1,000 nits of brightness. This is only able to go up to 400 nits. For my eyes though, if you're running one of those 1000 nits or even 600 or 800, it's just a little too bright in my eyes and it gets a little fatiguing. So that's why HDR, it wasn't a very important thing. Now, this monitor, when I do enable HDR content, for example, The Division 2, that game, and Tomb Raider, those games have the capability to display HDR content. And when you enable HDR content, everything gets a little bit brighter, colors pop a little bit more, but then, again, for me, my eyes get a little bit more fatigued over time, much more quickly than not. So for me, I actually leave HDR off, and I can only imagine what HDR 1000 really looks like, bombarding your eyes with all that brightness. It's just too much for me. So that's that. One last thing to be aware of about this monitor, if you have an older GPU, is that you may need to update the firmware of the display port on that GPU. So for example, I have a GTX 1080. and it was designed for DisplayPort 1.2. This being a 1.4 monitor, it had issues with displaying the BIOS and the boot screens. It would be completely dark whenever I started the computer, and the monitor will only turn on when I got into Windows. Now, all you need to do is to just download this little update tool for DisplayPort 1.3 and 1.4, flash the BIOS on, or flash whatever the DisplayPort firmware on that, and it's ready to go. So now it can easily get into the firmware. Another feature I really like about this monitor is to be able to see the frames per second on a hardware level. In the menu here, if you go to settings, there is an option in here where you can display the frames per second. So right up here, you can see I'm showing 160 frames per second. And you can see that it'll change as the G-Sync variable refresh rate changes. Now, that right there tells me that my G-Sync is working. Sometimes for some reason, some games or whatever just does not work well with G-Sync, when maybe you need to restart the game or reset the computer. The technicalities of that, just sometimes it doesn't work, right? So it's good to know that you can see it fluctuating, you can see it's working there. All right, so hopefully this helps you out in your purchasing decisions. I know personally I was looking at a lot of these YouTube videos on this monitor, trying to figure out if this is the one to buy or should I get something else. The only difficulty now truly is to get your hands on this monitor. I know this thing came out about 6 months ago, give or take, at the end of 2019, but it's still really hard to get. It's pretty much sold out everywhere in B&H, Amazon. I actually managed to snag this one off of Amazon, so I'll leave a link in the description down below where I purchased this. Hopefully it's either back in stock really soon or you manage to get one as well. So if you have any questions about this monitor, make sure to hit me up on the comments down below and I'll try to answer them as they come in. If you want to see more videos like this, especially tech or anything gadget related, make sure to subscribe and look out for future videos. I'll see you guys in the next one.